There's a pyramid of power with eyes that can see it all. Cameras to capture your image at City Hall. Realize they listen whenever you make a call. If you want a revolution, I really give it to y'all. Strength is the army that bands against bands of dead presidents, determining the life of mankind of cancerous. How we breathe vapors, Greek got us blinking in streets like cheap paper. Assemble the masses, melt the plastic, crawl line, realign when the shit gets drastic. Lift the veil when the system's unmasked. It's just another pyramid scheme, a government racket. Combined with the power of Charles Jurassic, gnashing T-Rex with covert tactics. Rise from the ashes to back the ashes. Bring the madness. There's a pyramid of power whenever you make a call. If you want a revolution, I really give it to y'all. Strength is the army that stands against plans of dead presidents, determining the life of mankind. Of cancerous, how we breathe vapors. Greek got us blinking and streets like cheap paper. Assemble the masses, melt the plastic, compound, realign when the shit gets drastic. Lift the veil when the system's unmasked. It's just another pyramid scheme, a government racket. Divide with the power with Charles Jurassic. Nation T-Rex with covert tactics. Rise from the ashes to back the atlas. Bring the madness. There's a pyramid of power with eyes that can see it all. Cameras to
Check 1 2 1 2. My levels look good, so hello everybody. It is 5 o'clock exactly, so I'm going to get started with class. For those of you who are part of my actual audio video class, I see, well, Jesse's in chat. I think Meg's in. Welcome to your final class before the due date of your final assignment. Please note that we do have class next week, just we won't be working on stuff that pertains to the assignment. For everyone else who has tuned in, welcome to my kind of open audio-video editing classroom. Oh, Allie's in chat too. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes to let people roll in. I did just send out an email to my actual class list. And in the meantime, how's everyone doing? How are you faring with being stuck at home? Or in your neighborhoods, at least. Bored, yes. Players. I don't know if I know you personally, but yeah, boredom has been kind of brutal. Jesse just got home from work. Allie's going to go crazy. Oh, Rachel, okay. Hey, Rachel. Yeah, I've been lucky enough. I live right on a beautiful park, so I have the luxury of my neighborhood walk being through a nice park. But funny enough, the other day I actually did a nice long hike, and then my sister and I and her boyfriend, we all played catch. Hey there, Mick. Glad you could join class today. But yeah, boredom definitely can get the best of you right now. My family's doing pretty much everything we can to stay with it. So whether it's me cooking new food or typing a research paper, fair enough. Yeah, whether I'm cooking new food or we have I think it's a 9,000 piece jigsaw puzzle we've all been working on for the last 2.5 weeks. We have to do it in quarters because our dining room table isn't big enough for it. Forcing our parents to watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Very good call. I've transcended Brooklyn Nine-Nine for now because I can only watch it so many times in quarantine. I think I've watched it somewhere between 15 and 80 times. My sister's been recommending Tiger King like crazy. Personally, I've been, I caught up. I finally watched Parasite, which I highly recommend to anybody. It definitely deserved the Oscar it got. Allie, you definitely have a Gina-esque vibe to you, for sure. Okay, I'll watch Tiger King. I'll start watching Tiger King once I'm done class today. I can finish marking assignments and watch Tiger King. By the way, how is the level of the music? Oh, Jesse doesn't want... Okay, I shouldn't watch it because it's all messed up. My sister has given me a fair warning. I'm very curious to see what all the hype is about. Music's good, good. So today, for those who have seen the example file, we're going to be editing some footage I shot at the Tim Hortons Stadium where the Ticats play in Hamilton. We're going to be learning how to really quickly learn how to throw music into our video projects. Beyond that, because that will take no time at all, I've already taught my AV class. I've already taught you how to use Adobe Audition, so we're going to skim right through that and then do some review of what we've gone over, what you'll need to know for your final assignment due next week. And then finally, I want to teach you some more advanced keyframing techniques that you can still apply in Adobe Premiere. You don't have to start moving into any other fancier software. You can still just work in Premiere. So with that, I'm going to pull up a copy of what I cut up for you guys. So for now, I am going to kill the music just so that we can hear the music in the actual video. Here we go. Let's switch over. Help if it appeared on the right page. Here we go. So by the end of today's class, you should be able to cut something along the lines of this. I would call that, I'm going to mute it and let it play a little more. There we go. I would call something like this, relatively speaking, I would call this your kind of basic promo video. It's fairly simple to cut together. It's, every time. Here, let's try this one more time. Kill that. And let's add actual sound to it. There we go. So, as I was saying, as I switch my music and display, this is kind of your basic, real basic promo video. It's super simple to throw together, and it requires nothing more than a little bit of keyframing for some text and a decent piece of footage. Now I saw a question in chat. Jesse, I will admit that I'm a little bit behind on marking. My hope is to have them finished by midnight tonight, and hopefully have the marks out as well by that point. So expect a mark tomorrow morning, if not sooner. Sorry about that. I did fall kind of behind. I've had to ramp up 2 of my other classes and make them, digitize them as well. So things have had me run a bit ragged recently. So now that we've seen kind of what we're going to cut together, let's back out of that and talk about get started cutting it. Pardon me while I adjust the music level slightly. There we go. That's a little bit better for my ears. Hopefully you guys can still hear it. Thanks, Allie. That would be the key light I have over to my side. It's a very flattering light. So let's get started on cutting this together. For those of you who are in my class and have access to the files, everything is on eLearn. There's a Dropbox link. Everything's pre-cut, so all the files are pretty small. You could probably download them in the next 10 minutes or so. For those who aren't part of my class who may be tuning in, unfortunately I can't give you access to these files. In the future I hope to be able to. Until then, I'm hoping you'll be able to just kind of follow along and perhaps even use some of your own footage to practice these skills. So what I'm going to do is pull up these files that I gave you access to. I have 5 files as far as footage goes for you to work with. I've labeled them Cheer 1, 01, 02, 03, 04, etc. And then I've also given you access to 2 music tracks. Please keep in mind these music tracks are from a service called Monstercat. They're a publisher / sub-publisher of electronic music. It's all the music that I play during stream. The reason I've included these is because I can play them during stream. I've licensed them from the company. It's nice. It's, I think, $5 a month to license their entire catalog to use on Twitch. For yourselves, if you were to actually make a product and try to publish something like this, you would be demonetized. There would be a copyright strike put against your video, and so you need to be able to find music that is what's called royalty free. I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it one more time because it is important, and share a resource that I use constantly for making my own videos. So what I want to introduce y'all to, or reintroduce y'all to, depending on who I'm speaking to, is the YouTube Audio Library. Super straightforward. It's a entire database of copyright-free music on YouTube that you can download, cut up, use in your own videos. What's nice is that at least if you're posting to YouTube, none of these music tracks will be flagged by the YouTube algorithm. And a good rule of thumb is if it passes on YouTube, it will probably pass everywhere. No guarantees, but it's a good rule of thumb. So what's awesome about this is I can click through, press play, listen to the tune, see if I like it. If I do, it's as simple as clicking the download button. I can reorganize everything by genre, mood, an instrument that's used in it. I could search for specific music if I wanted to. In this case, I'm using stuff that I've already sourced, but this is a really, really valuable link for you guys to have. For those who have access to the eLearn page, my actual AV students, it's on eLearn. If you don't have access to eLearn, literally looking up YouTube Music Library, YouTube Audio Library on Google will get you here. It's, well, here, why don't I just do this? There we go. So feel free to bookmark that if you're looking for music to use for your videos. It's all completely free. So I'm going to exit out of that for now. So in my case, I've already created a project and imported all these files, cut together some examples. So you'll notice over here in the project tab on Premiere, all my files are all there. Mick, if you make your own music, you own the copyright. Technically, there's some legal difficulties around if you're remixing something, but if you own a guitar and can sing into a mic and use that for your video, that's your own property. That's the benefit of copyright. That's the reason it exists, is to protect the artist. So as much as it's a pain to navigate it as like a video editor, it's something that's really valuable. I own all my videos I make for the exact same reason, unless I've sold them or sold the license to them. So I have all these files imported, and what I'm going to do is, again, they're all pre-cut, so I'm just going to highlight the first, second, and third clip I included, cheer 101, 102, 103. I hold shift and click on the bottom one so that I can drag them all into my sequence. If you don't have a sequence created, literally just drag them in anyways and it will create a sequence for you. One thing to note about this footage is that this footage is shot in 4K. If I drag over using this crossbar here, if I drag over to video info, we can see that 3840 by 2160 is a 4K format. What's awesome about this is that if we export it at full HD, we can really zoom into the picture. We're not going to right now, but it's something to keep in mind when you're shooting your own stuff, especially if you use an iPhone, because I believe iPhones, most relatively new models, shoot in 4K. Pardon me, I'm going to take a sip of water. So I've dragged these in. You'll note that each of these shots, if I just jump through them, are really kind of muddy and gray and low contrast, and we'll get to that when we talk about color correction. For now, what we're going to do is talk about music. Yes, hashtag stay hydrated. Also, wash your hands, people. I have sanitizer over on the side of my desk. So what we're going to do before anything else is cut in some music. I've already listened to these tracks, so I'm going to probably be typing in very specific time codes as far as what I'm going to cut. For yourselves, it's really trial and error. You need to play these things through and figure out where to cut them. Or if you're trained in editing software like Adobe Audition, you can make little remixes, trim up music so that it flows perfectly and cuts out things you don't want. I didn't take the time to do that because that's a lot of effort just for an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my first track, which is Crying Shame by Pegboard Nerds featuring Nervo. If I double click on it, much like any footage, we get a preview up in the top corner of our program. What this preview allows for is for us to see the actual waveform of the song. And we treat this exactly like we would any other preview, any other footage. We can mark ins and outs, and you can see here I already have. We can zoom in on it. We can highlight specific parts of it. We can treat it exactly like any other footage. Note that this is pretty straightforward, and this is why we're skimming through music pretty quickly. So I've marked an in and an out. I'm going to, since we're working with music, I'm really going to bring down the music playing in my background. There we go, that should be good. So, I'm still hearing it. Actually, let's see, I'm going to play. Yeah. Let me know if the two tracks gets annoying. For me, I'm really only hearing the louder of the two. But if it's an issue, let me know. So, I've highlighted the in and the out for this already. The time codes I used were, and you can do this yourself, you can type in here a specific time code. I used 56:15, so that's 56 seconds and 15 frames. And then for the other, I used For the other, I used 2:38:03. So I just type 2.38.03, and that takes me to my out. And then, much like any other clip, you would hit O to mark your out. I'm going to click and drag to bring the music down into my timeline. And you'll note it's way longer than we really require. But ultimately, we have music on our track. It's as simple as that. We drag it in like we would any footage, except it's on an audio track. The only things to keep in mind are that we have, much like in Adobe Audition, we have the ability to mute, the ability to solo. We could record over the track. This is very useful for if you're doing voiceover. You can watch what you're recording to. But beyond that, it's pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this down so that it fits our clip a little bit better. And I happen to know, because I'm the teacher who prepared this, that I like the end of this long clip better. So I'm going to drag all my footage to the end. And again, just like any other video clip we would edit, we have all the same cutting tools that we can make use of. So in this case, I'm holding down Control and using my yellow trim tool, which means that everything will jump along the timeline as I cut. So if I drag it to the beginning of the clip, everything jumps to the beginning. So now when I play, so I don't love that this clip is slowed down. So what I'm going to do is, I know that it slows down right about here. And I can tell that by, if we stretch this out, we can see the waveform in our clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it. The way I do this is I click on the clip I want to mark and just hit M for mark. You'll see this little green marker. So now I know that right about when this marker is on the clip, I want to start fading out my music. I want to end my video. So I'm going to drag it over, and you'll note this black line appearing. I'm dragging over it. This black line indicates that this marker is now synced up with the end of my clip, which is a benefit of using markers. Now, using my red cutting tool, I'm going to drag out the beginning of the music track so that it syncs up with the beginning of my video. So one thing to note is that the more kind of love you give this process, the better your results are going to be. The more time you take to find music that syncs up with your action, to cut your piece so that it syncs up with your action, to make it so that when you come into a hard beat, you also happen to be coming into a cut on your footage. The more you do that, the more intentional and the more professional your video will feel. In the case of this, I'm doing this as a quick example, but you'll see with my other shot, the example I gave you guys at the beginning, I took a bit more time to find a segment I liked, so that the cuts worked a bit better. But let's go over some more basics for audio. The only other things to keep in mind are that we primarily can adjust the volume of our clip. Ultimately, it's not too loud in your guys' headphones because I've turned down my audio output for the stream. But if you look get myself out of the way there. If you look at our audio levels, we're clipping at 0, which isn't abnormal for music, but for a video we're putting out, we want it lower. So what I'm going to do is pause. I'm going to simply hover over this line in the middle of our audio track. And this line first differentiates both our different audio tracks, our left and our right ears. But also if I click and hold on that line and drag it down, you'll see this little pop-up show up with a negative or a positive decibel amount. So I'm going to drag mine down till it says about -6. There we go. When I let go, we see this white line has appeared. And this line is indicative of the volume of our piece, or any adjustments to volume that we've made. So now, since I dragged it to -6, when we play back, on our levels, our audio is coming out to about -6, which is exactly what we want. We drag down all the audio. But if we only want to affect a piece of it, we have to start keyframing. We keyframe audio just like we would any other value when cutting together a video. So the way I'm going to keyframe is I'm going to go over to my toolbar here and click on the pen tool. I can also press the P button to bring it up, P for pen. And when I click on that white line, we get these little keyframes appear. Let me zoom in so they're a little bit bigger. These keyframes indicate that when this little icon, when our playhead lands on this icon, that's the value of it. So currently, both of them, when the playhead's on them, are worth -6 decibels, just like everywhere else on the line. But if I click and drag one to, let's say, the beginning and all the way to the bottom, we get this negative infinity, negative sideways 8 decibels, which means no volume at all. So now, our audio is going to slowly rise to this -6 level that we put it at. So we've effectively keyframed our audio. I can do the same thing over here, but the way I'm going to show it to you is different. So instead of using the pen tool here, which is honestly the more efficient way to do this, I'm going to make sure that our audio is selected, and I'm going to go up to Effect Controls up top. I'm going to click on that, and just like keyframing everything else, the stuff I showed a lot of you guys last week, we're going to make sure our playhead's where we want it. So let's say about here. This is where we start getting into that slow bit of audio. I'm going to click this little diamond here, which is the Add Keyframe button, which means we now have a keyframe show up. I'm then going to drag it to the end of our video, add another keyframe, and change the value to -300. It doesn't really matter. Once you get that low, you don't hear it. And there we go. It's the exact same process as using the pen tool, just done a different way. We can also adjust things like our channel volume, our panning, which means we can put the music in just one ear or the other, or some variation thereof. We also have all sorts of things. If we click the Effects tab near the bottom, we have all sorts of different audio effects that we can play with. Some are more useful than others. Some are super simple. Some are very complex. Things like amplify or an EQ are ways that we can adjust specific aspects of our audio. There's other things like filling the right with left or left with right that's only specific to certain circumstances. But ultimately, there's all sorts of things to play with, and you can look up every one of these effects not only on the Adobe site, where it will explain in very technical terms what these things do. You can also just Google them, look up tutorials on them. The cool thing about editing audio is it's been a science for practically slowly approaching 100 years at this point, editing audio or working with audio. So a lot of these things are very well known and well researched, well understood. So the only other thing, I'm going to press C to bring up my razor tool and just cut everything at the end of my video and delete what I don't need. So straightforward, that's pretty much it for audio. There are other things we can do. We can drag in sound effects, we could drag in voiceover, but all the work here is the same. Premiere is not designed to be a master audio editing suite, but it will get the job done most of the time. For those times when you need to go a bit more in depth, when you need to remix a song, when you need to remove noise from the background, there's one trick we can use in Premiere to get us there. And that is, once our audio's in, we can right click on it. And then we can move up to Edit Clip in Adobe Audition. I'm not going to click it because I don't want the program to boot up. But doing this creates a copy of the clip, opens it in Adobe Audition, and you can edit it all there. You can then save it as whatever you could save it as Pegboard Nerds song remixed version, and it will automatically replace your clip in Premiere with the edited version. It's a really useful tool if you have a computer that can run both programs at once. And it's a really good way to keep everything integrated. You're not throwing files here and there. You're not making new folders. It's all tied together. There's other programs that work this exact same way with Adobe or with Premiere, as well as many other programs that work with each other. This is only one example of that. So again, that's right click on your audio, click Edit Clip in Adobe Audition. So with that, before I move on to color correction, which this clip desperately needs, are there any questions anyone has about music? I will say, those of you who have the assignment coming up next week, I have not provided you music. I want you to find royalty-free music and edit it into your piece. So I'll give it 1 second for any questions to come up, and then we'll move on to color correction. And for the record, those of you in chat, because you're not all just from my AV class, if you aren't part of my class, feel free to ask questions. this is an open classroom for whoever happens to tune in. Good that you're good, Mick. Glad this was easy enough to follow along. And yeah, ultimately I do prefer you use royalty free. I will be the only one listening to it though, and I don't have algorithms to check. But try to make it a practice of finding royalty free music, because you can't just throw, I think they were originally dancing to AC/DC. I can't just throw that in a video and be like, yeah, cool, I can steal their music. So making it a practice to find royalty free is always a good call. So I'm going to get started on color correction. If any other questions come up, that's cool. I'll answer them. And for those who I haven't said this to, if you really want to get my attention with a question, especially while I'm showing you something, just at me in chat. Just at Chris Arndt Instructor. That way it pops up highlighted so I can see it a bit better. So without further ado, I'm going to move to color correction. And the first thing we do with color correction, I already have it open, but I'm going to close it for now. First thing we do with color correction is we go to Window, we go to Lumetri Color. We can open scopes, but in this case, we're not going to. We're going to start getting used to the idea of what looks right by eye. And speaking of that, I'm using not the best monitor here. So if everything is a tinge blue or a tinge orange, it's probably because my monitor is. Please bear with it. In your case, just color correct in a way that looks right to you. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to figure out some white balance. Ultimately, this piece isn't too bad. For me, it's a little bit orange. So I'm going to, in my basic correction, adjust my temperature and tint tools. So I'm going to make things a tad more blue. But honestly, it doesn't look too bad for white balance. What this really, really needs is contrast. And contrast is established in one very simple way. Contrast means that our whites are really white and our blacks are really black. And so we can adjust this contrast slider, and that'll definitely have an effect. But what else we want to do is affect things like our highlights. Currently we have a sun shining right into my lens, and that's very intentional. So I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to leave our highlights and instead just drag down our shadows. And then drag down our blacks. And in adjusting these things, I'll drag down the whites a little, bring up the highlights a tad. I'll also bring up our exposure. That way I can bring everything else down. I'm going to add more contrast. There we go. That's looking moderately acceptable on my cruddy monitor. The only other thing I'm going to adjust is bring up my saturation as well. And that will really make a difference on the way I shot this. I shot it in a really muted tone. That way I could bring a lot more color out. So by bringing my saturation up a lot to 168, we start to see the blue from the sky come out. We start to see the yellow of the pom-poms and their socks come out. So as we play through, so we have something like this as opposed to that. And it will astonish you once you've done the color correction, once you've done the editing, just quickly turning off the settings you turned on, typically by clicking this little FX button, you'll be astonished how different it really is. A good rule of thumb while you're editing, because color correction is kind of the last step you want to do, a good rule of thumb is that you shouldn't be looking at a clip for more than 10 seconds. Or better put, if you're editing a clip for more than 10 seconds, your eye has adjusted to your edit. You've forgotten by that point what the original clip will look like, which is fine, but you'll find that if you're editing a whole bunch of clips in a row, the first clip you edited versus the last clip you edited will look very different, even though you feel like you're doing the same thing. It's hard to explain, but as you get more practice in this kind of thing, you'll start to understand what I meant by that obscure statement. So I'm rather than making the same edit on each of these, because they were all shot at the same time in the same location in the same lighting, what I can do is copy and paste this edit. Before that, I want to show you one other tool in color correction that's super straightforward, very easy to understand, and can make a bit of difference on your shot. So rather than working in basic correction up here, I'm going to click on Vignette down at the bottom here. It's 4 simple sliders: amount, midpoint, roundness, and feather. The big one, obviously, is amount, and Vignette, for those who aren't aware, is that kind of framing, outlining effect, whether in black or white. Positive values are white, negative values are black. So I'm going to go negative 1.5. Nothing too crazy, just enough to make a difference. I could adjust the midpoint, which draws it in a bit. I can adjust the roundness, which makes it square or circular, or the feather, which the more there is, the more diffuse the edge of your vignette. The less there is, the harder the edge. I'm going to leave that for now. We'll set it to a simple negative 1.5 and call that good for now. I'm then going to right click on my video clip and click copy. I'll right click on my next one. I'm going to jump over to it. Right click on it, click paste attributes. And then I'm going to make sure the only thing selected is the checkbox next to effects and Lumetri color. And hit OK. Immediate difference. It's that versus that. Who in their right mind could tell you that this doesn't look better than this? So we are going to do the exact same thing with the third clip. We're going to right click, click paste attributes, make sure the right things are selected, and hit OK. So that's, in a nutshell, color correction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start bringing in my other clips and my other audio, and we're going to cut something together, not only with music and color correction, but also throw some graphics in there and keyframe them. Then we'll get into the advanced stuff. While I get everything set up, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to shout out in chat. Oh, you can continue to talk in chat even while I'm editing. That is no problem. This isn't a case of you're not allowed to look at your phone. It's the luxury of an online class. What I am going to do, I'm going to drag in my 4th and 5th, my Cheer 0201 and 0202 clips. I'll just drag them in. They go right side by side. Without any audio, I'm just going to play through them. We have this nice kind of sweeping shot of the stadium. A spin, and then we come back to the cheerleaders. I was very lucky to do this shoot. It's by far one of the kind of nicest shoots I've been able to do. Plus, I'm literally standing in the middle of Tim Hortons Field filming at halftime, which is something you don't often get the chance to do. Rather than bring in the music, first I'm going to color correct this footage. I'm going to use the same settings as the other shots I was doing. For the record, anyone who is trying to follow along at pace, I'm just going to paste in. And actually this shot is a tad darker, so I'm going to bring up my exposure a bit to 1.1. That's a bit nicer. There we go. So these settings I'm currently using are, I'm slightly toward the blue on color temperature. My exposure is up a little bit. My contrast is up a fair bit, around 50. My highlights are down by 25. My shadows are really far down. My whites and blacks are about halfway down, so at about -50. And then my saturation's blown out at 168. I know that was a lot of numbers all of a sudden, but you're going to start, as you do this more and more, as you color correct more and more, you're just going to start getting used to exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. The jargon and the speed of it all is something you grow accustomed to. So one more time, my exposure and my contrast are up a little bit. Everything else is down, with my shadows being particularly low down. My saturation is really high, and I'm slightly blue on color temperature. So we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to keep going over that. Oh, and vignette is at -1.5. So now I'm going to bring in my next piece of music. It is Soldier by Stonebank, from the looks of it. And here is a sample of it. With this clip, I'm going with something a little bit more intense because that's where I'm taking my graphics. That's the feeling I'm trying to give this. After all, sports games, the idea is to be intense, to pump up the crowd. So, as far as this clip goes, I'm using the in of 35:18. So that's 35 seconds and 18 frames for my in, and 1 minute, 16 seconds, and 10 frames for my out. Also known as somewhere around the first intense bit, the first drop. You can cut from wherever you want in a song. You can use whatever song you want, again, within copyright law. This happens to be what I chose. Feel free to do something else on your own, and for the most people who are tuning into chat have a means of contacting me. Feel free to send me your work. Send me what you do while we're working in class. I'll happily give you my opinion on it. So I'm going to drag in my audio. There we go. Correction. I marked new ins and outs for some reason. What I'm going to remark is I'm going to remark my in at 45:02. Call that my in. And then go to my out at 1:08:05. There we go. That's a bit shorter. There, that's what I'm dragging in. So, pardon me 1 second. Beauty. So now that the audio is dragged in, we have this kind of intense vibe about our shoot. And we can do lots of different things, lots of different edits to really accentuate that vibe. At the end of the day, we're always playing toward an emotion. We always want our audience to feel a certain way. In this case, we're going for pumped up, we're going for intense, we're going for, well, it's a Tie Cats, we're going for animalistic. And so we need to feed into that. Everything needs to be like a heart beating. So, what we're going to start with is a nice and fairly simple graphic, nothing too far beyond what we covered last week. So I'm going to click on my text tool, or my type tool. Click on the middle of my shot. I get this little red box, and I'm going to type Tie Cats. Now, if that doesn't scream intensity, I don't know what does. That said, we could do a lot more. So I'm going to open my Essential Graphics. I already have it open, but you would find it under Window, Essential Graphics. That's Window, Essential Graphics. So with my graphics layer clicked, I go to Essential Graphics and I can select my specific title. I'm going to change a couple of things. I'm going to change my font to November, which is a font that, to my knowledge, comes with Adobe. So if you have Premiere, you should probably have this font. But any really thick, intense, bold font will work for the vibe we're going for. I'm going to change my font size up to 850. Nice and big. And then I'm going to, up in this align and transform section, center it with both these buttons here. Center vertical, center horizontal. That throws my text right in the middle of the shot. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that my graphics layer for the Ty Cats title stretches across the entire first clip that I'm using. We want to make sure it's on there the entire time. You know, we could just leave the graphic up, but who wants that? Let's go with something a bit more interesting. As far as the creating graphics part of this goes, that's about it. That's a title. Pretty straightforward, right? What we're going to do now is keyframe it, make it pop a little bit more. So I'm going to go to a point where I want the text to come in. So let's say right about here. I'll make sure my graphics are selected. I'll go up to Effect Controls, and I'll click on the stopwatch next to Scale. I'm now going to set that value from 100 to 0. That way it's scaled down to nothing. I'm then going to go over to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 frames. I did that by pressing my right arrow 10 times. And I'm going to change the value to 120. Then I go over 2 more frames and change it to 100. At the end of the day, we want to end with our text as big as we intend it to be, which is 100%. But what I added, and anyone who was here for last week's class, I added a little pop right before that. So when it pops in, it gets nice and big and then pops back down. Again, it feels more natural, it feels jumpy, it feels kind of bouncy. And with a bunch of cheerleaders and a big crowd literally bouncing around, being energetic, let's add some bounce to our graphics. So then I'm going to go to the point where I want the graphic to disappear. Let's say right about the time they raise their pom-poms. So let's mark here for 100%. I do that by clicking the Create Keyframe button. I'll go over 2 frames, change it to 120, and then go over another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and change it to 0. So we're doing the exact same animation in reverse. On the way out, it bounces up and goes out. I will say that it disappears a little bit slow for my taste. So I'm going to zoom in on my timeline, on my keyframe timeline, by clicking up here and pressing the plus button. I'll move to where my keyframe is by clicking this arrow here. Go to next keyframe. That takes me to the last one. I'll zoom in, move over 2, and then click and drag my keyframe to match. That way this is now 8 in between instead of 10. That speed feels good to me. So that's about it. That's the graphic. Or that's the kind of graphic that I taught last week. Super straightforward, super quick, real easy to follow along. As far as a audience perspective, I do hope you all are following along fairly well. If you're not, please shout out. If I'm going too fast, call me out on it. I'm happy to slow down. I've only been live for an hour. I'm happy to go a little bit slower. While I take a sip of water, feel free to shout out. Otherwise, we're going to move into our next graphic, which is a bit more intense. Let's mute this for now. So our next graphic has 3 different pieces of text popping up. then having them bounce into the camera, with the third one creating a dip to white, an artificial dip to white. Which is the point at which, if we wanted to, we could actually change our shot. We could add a cut right here and no one would know. Or it wouldn't be so obvious. In this case, I just went with the same cut. So this is a lot to dissect at once. We have appear, 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 bounce, bounce, and then expand, and then fade back down. But ultimately, this is all basic keyframes. This is all pretty much what I've been showing you, just layered in a way that makes it more complex. So, going back to our copy, I am going to, using the text tool, click once and throw in the word eat. Then I'll click around here to make sure that my eat graphics layer is deselected. Click again to create a new layer, M. And then finally, one for raw. So currently I'm going to turn off the raw and M layers so that we can just focus on eat. I do that by clicking on this little eyeball over here, and if there's a line through it and it's blue, we know it's turned off. It's like muting a layer. So I click on this eat layer and then click on the layer up here, and we're going to change a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is center and center our text. This throws it right in the middle. Again, that's in our align and transform tools. The next thing I'm going to do, I love the text, I love the font, we're going to stick with it. There's no sense in changing it. And there's no sense in changing the color right now. We could go for a black and yellow thing. We're not going to today. That said, if you do need a refresher on how to change colors, shout out in chat and I'll quick show you. What I'm going to do with this eat layer is change the font size to 550. A fair bit smaller. Then we'll click those center align buttons one more time. So we have our text right in the center, all nice. We're going to turn off our eat layer and turn on the M layer. Click on that guy, click on the layer in here in Essential Graphics. Do the exact same thing, except we're making our M layer 750 for font size. But same idea, we're centering, then we'll turn it off and move on to raw. Raw, we are going to change the font size to 410. I know all these because I made the last one and I just copied down the settings. But you can play around with this. You can do whatever you want with these graphics. It's really your creativity that determines the feel of this promo, right? So I'm going to center raw as well. Now if we turn on all the layers, they're all on top of each other, of course. So now I'm going to click on the eat layer, and rather than edit in Essential Graphics, I'm going to go over to Effect Controls and change our position, our second number in position, our vertical position, to put eat at the top. Then I'll click on raw and do the exact same thing and make sure raw is on the bottom. Now I'm not loving the sizes on this. I might want to make them a little bit bigger. And so what I'll do, rather than edit the entire graphic all over again in Essential Graphics, is I'm going to increase their scale on. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to highlight all three by clicking and dragging. Randomly teaching you another skill I did not expect to teach you today. We're going to edit those three or highlight those three and right click on them. And we're going to click the option Nest. And what nesting does, I'm just going to name this eat raw. What nesting does is turns all these different layers into one single layer almost like a miniature sequence, so that when I click on it and edit the scale on it to, let's say, 140, the size of all the clips at once change. I'm going to change that back to 135 and lower it a little bit down so that it's in the middle of our shot. So now we've got our graphic. We've got the basic graphic that we can work with. What I am going to do is stretch. Going to double click on my nest, highlight all my clips, stretch them out nice and long. Really doesn't matter how long they go, because I'm going to go back to my class copy, my main sequence, by clicking up here, and stretch this one out just to the end of our video clip. So now we have to start animating. I'm hoping everyone is following along to this point. If you're not, again, please shout out. There we go. So we're going to start animating these. The first thing we're going to do is double click. Actually, the first thing we're going to do is click on our video sequence, our cheer 0202. I'm going to press Control C to copy it. We can also just right click and click copy. Then if I open up the nest by double clicking on it, I'm going to, making sure not to copy over anything or paste over anything, just paste in that video clip and drag it to the beginning of our nested sequence. So now I can see how everything would look in the final product. The only thing we need to remember is to turn off or delete this footage once we're done animating. Because again, if we leave it, then we get a slightly zoomed in version of our original footage. So what we want this clip to do is essentially we want our eat to appear with a little bounce, our M to appear with a little bounce, and then our raw to appear with a little bounce. That's where we want to start. So let's say we want eat to start appearing right about here. I'm going to click on the eat layer, click on scale, just like we did with the Ty-Cats graphic. We'll start with 0. We make sure a keyframe exists, that our stopwatch is on, everything like that. We're going to go over 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then we are going to change up to a simple 100. We're not going to worry too much about that bounce, because we're going to get all that bounce in our next set of animations. The thing to keep in mind is we want where we set our 100 keyframe is where we want to start our next layer. So I'm going to click scale on the M layer, set it to 0, go over 10, set it to 100. And then finally, click raw, click the stopwatch, set it to 0, go over 10, lost count, and set it to 100. So now we have something like this. And that's pretty good. The next thing we want is for everything to bounce. So I'm going to go over a little bit and say we want that animation to end here, so we'll have it start right about here. This is really just eyeballing it. There's no specific keyframe I'm working with. Either way, we're still working with scale. So again, E is going to bounce first, so I'll start with it. I'll click the keyframe button again to make sure we have a keyframe set for 100. Then I'm going to go over 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set it to 150. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set it to 100. And that's our bounce. So I'll click this arrow here to move to our last keyframe. And do the same thing for M. So click to set 100. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over. Set it to 150. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over. Set it to 100. Finally, we'll do this with raw. The thing to keep in mind with raw is that we'll set 100. We'll go over 5 to set 150. But then for our final keyframe here, we'll go over 5 and set our scale to 5,000. More than 5,000. We're going to set it to whatever we need to set it to make sure that our screen is entirely white. So in this case, it's 7,889. So now when we play through, so you'll note that when we get to raw, it very quickly it very quickly explodes. Like, we don't really see the animation all that much. So what I'm going to do is right click on that last keyframe and click ease in so that our animation eases into that a bit more. So when we play it through with our normal sequence, I'm going to turn off that first cheer layer. We'll go back to our sequence. And we blow up the screen with white. It plays fairly well. We could definitely tweak some things. That plays pretty well for a quick 10-minute edit. The next thing we need to keep in mind is that we can't just stay on white for the rest of the shot. So what I'm going to do is go back to our nested sequence by double-clicking on it, and by finding the point at which raw stops being exploded. There we go. So that's the point where it hits all white. I'm going to turn on my base layer again. I'm going to go over a couple of frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll make sure raw is selected. And at this point, I'm going to keyframe its opacity, how transparent it is. So I'm going to create a keyframe. Opacity by nature is turned on already. And I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so and set it to 0. So that when raw explodes, it should go back to our main shot. Perfect. I'm going to stretch that out a little bit by zooming in on our keyframes. I'll make sure I'm over that last one and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll make it a full 10. The only problem is, at this point, once this is exploded and comes back to normal, we still have EAT and M on the screen. So we need to affect their opacity as well. The best way to do this is with two keyframes literally side by side. So I'm going to, while still on raw, press back, this back arrow, until I get my first opacity keyframe. It's hard to see. There we go. So I'm on my first opacity keyframe. I'm then going to go to M and set my opacity keyframe again for that layer. I'll set it to 100. I'll go down to eat and I'll set its keyframe. Then I'm going to move over 1. I'm going to move over 1 frame and set the opacity for eat to 0, set the opacity for M to 0. This is like turning off a light switch. It's literally on for 1 frame and off on the next. So now, when we play through, they're not there. And if I turned off the raw layer, you'll see that as we approach, let me zoom in on the keyframes a little bit. As we approach the keyframes, when we pass them, we hit the first one, then the second. It's literally, again, like a light switch. But no one sees this happen because the entire time raw is taking up the entire screen. So I'm going to again turn off that cheer layer in our nested sequence and go back to our main sequence. And when we play through, pretty solid. The only other thing we can do, aside from rendering so it plays a bit more smoothly, is when we get to the end of our cheerleader footage, we'll click on that layer, set our opacity to 100, move closer to the end, and set it to 0. That way we have a nice dip to black at the end. We'll do the same thing by clicking on our pen tool in the toolbar here and keyframe our music out. And that's about it. I can't imagine that was easy to follow along with. I'm just going to keyframe the beginning of this. But that is a more advanced technique that you can play with. It's a really good, adding in these bounces and affecting different keyframes on different layers can really add a lot of depth to the video and graphics that you're cutting. So keyframe that at 0, keyframe that at 100. So in the span of 20 minutes, albeit I cut this once before, we have a decent little promo video. You'll notice it's a little jumpy. That's because I haven't rendered it yet. What I'm going to do okay, there we go. What I'm going to do is quick show you how to export, because I know a few people, again, have had trouble with that. So the way we export, I'm just going to mark an in and an out here. We go up to File, up top. We go to Export. We go to Media. Then we have a window appear on my other screen. From this screen, we make sure that our sequence settings are let's turn that off. There we go. We want our settings to be H.264 and match source high bit rate. Beyond that, we click on this blue text, which lets us choose a location and name for our project. Then we hit export. And when we go into that folder we just selected, we'll be able to find our MP4 video, which is the format that I want you to submit your assignments in. For those of you who have assignments to submit to me. I'm going to cancel out because I don't feel like exporting the video at the moment. And with that, that's the long and short of it. That's all you need to know to cut together your final assignments. Bit of keyframing, bit of graphic design, bit of color correction. There we go. I'll leave that be. So, pardon me, just had a setting I had to change. At this point, I'm going to kind of open the floor to questions. Is there anything you want to know? Is there anything you want to build upon that I've talked about here? I'm also just down to kind of chat for a bit. Take those headphones off. There we go. So, I'm not sure who all is still in chat at this point. We still seem to have quite a few viewers. Oh yeah, we certainly have some viewers. How is it going for everyone? Even if you're not in my audio video class, you can feel free to tune in and chat on the chat. I know that some of my dual credit students, my high school students, are joining in today. Ah, yes, the animated captions, yes, on the Mohawk registration. Let me pull that up and we'll dissect it. There's not a lot that I can immediately say, here's how you do it, because a lot of it was done with Adobe After Effects, but I can at least talk it through and try to give you some guidance, because there's a lot that you can recreate in other ways on Premiere. So we'll see what we can do. First, sick, cold, flu, hopefully not coronavirus, but if so, it happens. Bear with me while I find this video. Oh, still, it is a bummer being sick. And Mick, did you start your paper on capitalism being broken for fun or for a class? If it's for fun, I can admire that, but that's a very specific choice. Okay, first thing I'll do is mute that. Fair enough. May I ask what class? Well, I'm waiting on a response. I'm just going to play through this footage just to even remind myself of what exactly I did here. Fair enough. I don't envy you having to take a communications class. So yeah, this video is a lot of graphics templates that I created in After Effects and then imported over to Premiere. But I can at least give you the basics of how some of this works. Like that right there. This wipe design, pretty easy to recreate, relatively speaking. What I'll do is hopefully show you, or at least try to show you here. So there's one really big tool that I haven't yet touched on with graphics creation, and I'm not going to until next week because I don't want you to worry about it for your final assignment. But it's called masking, which is kind of like cutting parts out of a graphic intentionally, and that cut or that mask is something you can also keyframe. at the very least, I can show you how I created some of these transitions without using masks. And then next week, we'll talk about using masks. So what I'm going to do is, because we have different shots on our first clip here, I'm going to mute that. I'm going to create a mask, or create a graphic that gives us a transition point. Yes, Ali, I'll go over that in just a moment. So what I'm going to do here is give us a transition point between these two clips, because they jump in a really weird way. Same background, different person, right? So what I'm going to do is, in Essential Graphics, I'm going to click this little new layer button and build a rectangle. I'm then going to, using one of these blue handles, stretch the rectangle so that it fits more than across our video. So it's a bit extra on each side. I'm also going to adjust what's called our anchor point. That's this option over here next to position. It looks like a box with two little lines coming out of it. I'm going to adjust it so that it falls right in the middle of our rectangle. So that now when we do things like rotate, we rotate around that anchor point. So what I'm going to do is make sure that our graphic falls right over our cut, which happens to be right here. I'm going to trim down each side of it so that it's nice and short. We don't want our transition to be too long, right? That's pretty good. Then I'm going to start animating it. And instead of animating it over here in our effect controls, I'm actually going to animate it in Essential Graphics. And the way I do that is by clicking on the icons. If I wanted to animate anchor point, I'd click on that box. If I want to animate rotation, I click on the spiral. So I want to start by animating opacity. I want at the beginning of our shot it to be 0 opacity, so completely transparent. And we'll know I'm animating that if the icon is turned blue. You'll also note if I scroll down to that in Effect Controls, it now is a keyframe. So I'm going to go over a couple of frames. Well, let's call it 4. I want it to be quick. By 4 frames, I want it to be full opacity. And at the same time, I'll go back 1. So I'll go over 3 from the beginning. And I want it to start rotating as it animates, or as it becomes opaque. So I'll animate my rotation so that when I start it's at 0, and within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll call it 6 frames, I want it to rotate so that our rectangle reaches the corners of our shot. So now when we play through, it fades in and rotates, which is great, but we need it to fill the frame, right? So what I'm going to do is find the point at which it is done, that rotation, and then I'm going to edit our scale by clicking on that icon. But I don't want to affect both the length and the width of this shot, or of this graphic. I just want to affect one of them. So I click this little link here and disconnect it, so that now I can affect one or the other. I'll undo to get them both back to 100. So now I want this to, at this point, be at 100 and 100. But by the time we get to our cut, I want it to be full-sized. So it's going to be, in the case of this, 3500. Oh, I accidentally added another opacity keyframe. I'll just delete that. There we go. And while we're at it, let's go for a better color, just because this is a really gross beige. I'll go for kind of a Ty-Cat's yellowy orange. So now when we play it through, it rotates and then expands. This is the point at which we would add a mask. And a mask would become that midpoint, that little window in the middle that expands and shows our shot. I'm not going to teach you that right now. If you want to learn about masking, first of all, you can, for those who are my students, you can email me and ask me for resources. I'll send you a whole bunch. I'll go over masking in next week's class. Because it is something important to know. I just don't want you to fret over it right now. But if you insist on fretting, I will give you the resources to do so. So what I'm going to do instead is go here. So one frame after our cut, and make sure that by clicking on our vertical scale over here, I just create another keyframe. I'm then going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Was it 6? No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it was 9 frames. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And scale back down to 100. In fact, I could go to 10 frames and scale back down to 0. That's a really good way to kind of end this animation. So when it plays through, I figured you enjoyed fretting over this kind of thing, Jesse, but yeah, I'll send you some resources. So this is kind of a bounce, kind of a boomerang kind of feel to it. It swells up and then shrinks back down. I feel like that's a little bit quick. So what I'm going to do is click on that graphic and go back into our effect controls. Select these last 2 keyframes, which were the scale where it shrinks back down, and just move it over a bit. So our cut's a little bit longer, but it stays there for a second longer so you can see what's going on. And if I make that my out, I'll just render it, that way it'll look half decent. And because it's taking a moment to render, I'll do one even better. I'll make a cut here. Make a cut there, mark my in, mark my out, and just render that little section. There we go, that's going much faster. So Ali, I'll get to your question once this renders and we play it through. That's not a bad little transition for 6 minutes work. And you can use that graphic if I wanted to. I can copy that graphic and paste it over any cut I want to. The only thing to keep in mind is that you need to make sure that you need to make sure that the screen is fully transitioned or fully orange or whatever color you use when you're over the cut in your footage. Because if I do this, I'll play it through frame by frame. If I have my transition come in late, then you'll see it cut behind the footage. So you need to make sure wherever your cut is that the screen is completely orange. But yeah, it's a nice little, I'll let loop. It's a nice little transition for a couple minutes work. And that's not too far of a stretch from this one. The only difference again is this gap here where we can see through our graphic is the mask, is something I haven't yet taught you, but it's still that same feeling. if all else failed, you could always... No worries, Mick. I will catch you next week. You can always just fade out your graphics. Or, for example, with this one, keeping in mind that that little orange box that appears next to the text, that's a little bit more advanced, but having this block grow into your shot is the exact same thing we did there, where we changed the scale or size of our graphic of our box, and we just make sure that it changes size to match our text, which we also have stretch in or scale in. The text is a bit more complex because Adobe After Effects, which is the animation program I use, does different text animation. It's a lot more advanced. It's something that, for those who will be in my advanced audio editing class in the fall, hopefully, I'm hoping to go over a little bit of After Effects if all works out. But at the very least, on this channel, I do plan to continue teaching some more advanced editing techniques. Now, I've kept Allie waiting far too long as to what is wrong with her shot. So, to my knowledge, Allie, you got something like... Give me a second to break my program. File, new sequence. And then I build a 1080 full HD 30 frames a second sequence. And then I drag in my cheer footage. And it looks something like this, where everything's oddly zoomed in. Like, that's not what I originally shot, right? No, there needs to be no apologies in chat. I'm happy to teach whatever skills need to be taught. But Allie, is this something like what you were dealing with, where everything's oddly zoomed in? I'll give you a second to respond. Yeah. So, Allie is having this exact issue. My best guess as to what the problem is that you built a sequence that isn't the same size as your footage. So, your assignment would have been Salt Lick. I gave you full HD footage. You might have built a sequence that used a smaller resolution. I'm not sure exactly how you did that. No judgment here on my part. There's an easy fix to this. The fix is either you go to this little hamburger menu beside your sequence and change your... Pardon me. Sorry, wrong section. You have your sequence selected. You go up to sequence and you click sequence settings. You then get a window like this. So in here I can change all my different settings. So I know that my sequence is in 4K, so I would change my settings in here. I think it's 3120, I think. I can't... 4K is complicated because there's a whole bunch of different kinds of 4K. Either way, you could change your settings in here to suit what you're trying to go for. In this case, you would want to have gone from whatever your setting was to AVC HD, 1080p, square pixel, blah, blah, blah. For now, until you get more of a grasp of video resolutions and frame rates and all of that, if you don't want to do that, for the sake of my assignments, what you can do is you can just change the scale of your footage. For example, I've made this sequence which is HD. It's 1080p. It's what you see most video in nowadays. So that's what I want to export my video at. That's what I want my final product to be. But my source footage is 4K, so it's huge compared to the window that I'm looking through. So what I can do is change my scale on my footage. So I make sure my cheer footage is selected and change my scale to whatever makes it fit perfectly. In this case, if I'm going 4K down to 1080, it's 50. Suddenly not so zoomed in. It's actually a really good tool because if I didn't want so much sky in this shot, I could zoom in a little bit and drag things down and change up my framing. In this case, that's not exactly what I'm going for. But that's all you need to do, at least for sake of the assignments that you hand in to me for the moment. All you need to do is adjust your scale, and as long as it doesn't look real crazy once you're done exporting, it's probably okay. I'm not really at the point where I'm dinging marks for you giving me a 780p video versus 720p video versus a 1080, or your frame rate slightly off. I'm glad I could be of help, Ali. Does anyone else have any questions? Or really, at the end of the day, like, how's everyone doing? My other question basically is, how's this format suiting you? Are we moving at a pace that is good? Am I speaking too quickly? I'm learning with this kind of stuff as much as you guys are learning in class. I'm also realizing I need to drink more water because my voice is kind of raspy. Who all do we still have in chat anyway? We have a couple of my AV students and what looks like a bunch of my dual credit students. Good. I'm very glad you're enjoying that you can re-watch this or re-watch the tutorials. I have realized that when I do cut together tutorials, I should just re-record entirely because the pacing of my stream versus the pacing of a tutorial video is very different. Now, give me one quick second. I have to quick change a battery. There we go. My camera went black because the battery on my camera died, so I just had to switch it out. Fair enough, Ali. I'm glad you enjoyed the stream. Feel free to tune in. Well, please tune in next week for class. And I'm hoping to continue doing some of these tutorials and other editing lesson kind of things in the weeks coming. So, even while I'm not teaching. Now, there are definitely others in chat who are being kind of silent. So that's a good, good jumping off point, Jesse. Okay, interesting. So this class is not actually available as a dual credit right now. I'm working on changing that, but the powers that be are the powers that be. I also teach social journalism and advanced social journalism to high school students from all over Hamilton in one class. And I teach, and I think these are most of the people who are still tuned into the channel, I also teach Story 1 and 2 class for high school here in Hamilton as well. The other students who are tuning in are mostly from to my knowledge, my Story 1 and 2 class. And I'm just kind of leaving this class open as an open classroom for anyone who wants to tune in. Because at the end of the day, outside of the last couple of weeks and next class, most of the time when I'll be doing this, I'm just going to say, hey, I want to practice After Effects techniques. Anyone who wants to tune in and learn can tune in and learn. An open classroom. I'm looking at ways to make files available so people can follow along, and even have some like subscriber perks and like the normal streamer kind of shtick. Outside of that, those of you who are my students will have access to my classes, plain and simple. Unless someone tells me otherwise, I don't see there being an issue in my showing high school students what my basic audio video class looks like. Or some random person anywhere in the world tuning in and learning a little bit about social journalism. I don't necessarily see an issue with that. That said, most of my stuff going forward will be of my own accord on my own time. I won't be a paid teacher. I'll be a streamer for those lessons. Yeah, I'm there have been a few people who've said it's something they wish they'd had earlier, which is really cool. It's really flattering that that you're enjoying this, and that I'm also very happy I can sort of fill that void. It's something I care a lot about, is teaching, and especially when it comes to stuff that I truly love, like video editing and that sort of thing. It's a pleasure to teach. And when it comes to my doing this as a streamer rather than as a teacher per se, I'll be able to also be getting work done at the same time, or some passion projects at the same time. My biggest fear of all of this is running out of footage to edit. That said, I don't think that'll be too much of an issue. I can always turn to, for example, photography. I have plenty of photos I haven't edited, and I can show photography techniques just as much as I can video. So yeah, I'm saying a lot. Must be dehydrated. But with that, we're coming up on 2 hours. So unless there's any other questions that pop up in the next minute or two, I'm pretty much good to call this a wrap and kill stream for today. So thank you to whoever's still in chat, to whoever's still watching. Thank you to whoever's watching this after the fact on my YouTube channel or on a tutorial. And I hope you keep working. I hope you keep making stuff. I hope you keep being creative. And keep washing your hands, because COVID is a scary thing. So with that, I'm going to give it one more moment. And well, thank you, Jesse. I'm very, very glad to hear that. Finally, someone else shouts out. You're very welcome. And for those of you who are part of my my BR class or my other dual credit, feel free to tune in next week, Wednesday, 5 p.m. You'll have your own class times that I'm going to be streaming, but you can feel free to tune into this class and learn a bit more about video editing. It's my pleasure to teach it. And with that, I'm officially saying that's the end of stream for today. So have a good one, stay safe, stay informed, and keep washing your hands.